Today we're diving into an inspiring story about grace, kindness, and restoration in 2 Samuel chapter 9. This story is about Mephibosheth, a man whose life took a surprising turn. Even though he faced a difficult past, his story reminds us of hope and unexpected grace. Mephibosheth was the grandson of King Saul, the first king of Israel. His father was Jonathan, a brave warrior and a dear friend to the next king, David. Jonathan and David shared a special bond. They loved and respected each other like brothers. But unfortunately, Saul's reign as king was filled with challenges. Though he started well, he eventually disobeyed God, and his rule took a turn for the worse. God anointed David to be the next king, which made King Saul very jealous. For years, Saul tried to harm David, but Jonathan, Saul's son, protected his friend. Tragedy struck one day when the Philistines, a powerful enemy of Israel, went to battle against King Saul and his sons. Sadly, Saul and Jonathan were killed in battle on the same day. News of their deaths spread quickly across Israel, and a sense of fear swept through the land. At that time, Mephibosheth was only 5 years old. When his nurse heard that his father and grandfather had been killed, she feared for his life. In those days, when a new king took the throne, it was common to eliminate any family members of the previous king to prevent rebellion. So she picked him up and fled. While running in fear, a terrible accident happened. Mephibosheth's nurse stumbled and he fell to the ground. The fall was so bad that Mephibosheth became permanently crippled in both his feet. It was a heartbreaking beginning for someone who was once part of the royal family. Mephibosheth's future looked bleak, and he grew up in a distant town, far from his royal heritage. Many years later, when David had become the king of Israel, he remembered the promise he'd made to his friend Jonathan. He'd promised that he would show kindness to Jonathan's family. So one day, David asked his servants, "Is there anyone still left from the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake?" One of his servants, a man named Ziba, replied, "Yes, there is still a son of Jonathan. His name is Mephibosheth, and he is living in Lo-debar." David was thrilled to hear this news. Without hesitation, he sent his men to go find Mephibosheth and bring him to the palace. Imagine how Mephibosheth must have felt. Here he was, a man who had spent years living a humble life, probably feeling forgotten. And now, he was being summoned to meet the king himself. Mephibosheth bowed down before David, and with a mixture of fear and respect, he said, "Here is your servant." But David saw him differently. With kindness in his eyes, David said, "Don't be afraid, Mephibosheth. I want to show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I'm going to restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and from now on, you will always eat at my table." David's kindness must have overwhelmed Mephibosheth. He probably never expected anything like this. In fact, he humbly replied, "What is your servant, that you should notice a dead dog like me?" He was truly humbled and grateful for this unexpected grace. David honored his promise to Jonathan. He treated Mephibosheth as his own son and welcomed him into his home. Mephibosheth's life was completely transformed. From a place of obscurity and pain, he was given a place at the king's table and the inheritance of his family's lands. It was a powerful display of grace and mercy. Mephibosheth's story reminds us that kindness and mercy can change lives. King David didn't have to show kindness to Mephibosheth, but he chose to because of his love for Jonathan. Through David's actions, we see a picture of how love and mercy can restore even the most broken lives. This story also reminds us of how we're often shown kindness even when we feel unworthy, just as Mephibosheth did. No matter our circumstances, there's always hope for restoration. And just like Mephibosheth, we're invited to be part of something greater. In the same way that David extended kindness to Mephibosheth, God extends his kindness to us, inviting us to his table regardless of our past or our brokenness. As Mephibosheth took his place at the king's table, he was no longer seen as a cripple or a forgotten prince, but as a son of the king, restored and beloved. And in this embrace of grace, we're reminded that true kindness reaches beyond worthiness, lifting us to a place we could never earn on our own. For, like Mephibosheth, we're invited to sit at the king's table, forever welcomed, forever loved.